So, Paul, let's start with this. I mean, we're talking about the abundance agenda. Some people may not know what this is. Before we get there, let me do something that my one of my religious studies professors once told me to do always when I was approaching anything I've read is like, get a sense of what the priors are of this person. And so much will make sense. So like place for us, because this is both a sort of a policy prescription argument, but it's also, there's a big political argument that's really at the heart of this as to like where we're going with the Democratic Party. Place yourself in this ecosystem, if you will, so we get a sense of like where your critique is coming from, because it's largely a technical critique in many ways, not an ideological one. But give us a sense of like, you know, where you are within that spectrum of the broader Democratic Party.
So, you know, the Washington Monthly is kind of issue specific politically. As you said, we focus on policy solutions and political reality, not ideology. And so on some things we're pretty, moderate or even conservative. Other things we're quite wildly lefty. It all depends kind of on the issue. I would say that a lot of the abundance folks are a little bit the same way. They're not necessarily doctrinaire, old-fashioned liberals or progressives or whatever. I guess we come at it with the idea that, yes, abundance is a good thing. We do think that there's a problem in the world, in America, of people having given up on the idea that we can have progress, better lives, and so forth, and that there are certainly ways that are constraining the economy, constraining the society from achieving those ends. They are kind of, to sum up their argument is essentially various kinds of government red tape, local zoning ordinances, federal environmental statutes, processes within bureaucracies. This red tape is holding back the production of goods that we all need. Affordable housing, transmission lines to move electricity from solar and wind farms into the metro areas where the power is needed. Lower cost healthcare. That the way to get all of these good things is to get rid of, to sort of deregulate, to get rid of these bottlenecks. And in some ways they're right. Or on some of their points they're right. On some of them I think they're wrong. But fundamentally I think our argument is it's kind of small potatoes. And that if what you want is abundance that provides new technologies, new jobs, greater income, less poverty, a cleaner earth, there are bigger bottlenecks than government regulations. Specifically the consolidation of industry and the rise of oligarchy that we see around us.
All right, so let's. I want to just sort of examine this just a little bit more from their perspective, and we'll go through, because I think you've in your piece in the Washington Monthly, I think you steelman their arguments pretty well, and then we can go through the various sectors. I think relatively quickly in terms of what they're proposing and how I think. The small bore potatoes, it's not just, you're not seeing the forest for the trees. It's like you're taking a tree and it's as if you're taking a small, a small seedling and making it into a redwood. But with that said, when you're talking about getting rid of, like, greasing the wheels of government, and I know you were a Clinton speechwriter way back when, the first administration, I guess the only in retrospect, the idea of big government being over was from the early 90s. the idea of cutting government waste and getting rid of extra regulation. I think of Cass Sunstein during the Obama years. This does not seem particularly new in terms of an idea. I mean, just the only thing that's new is that it's gotten a fresh injection of, the Nicholson Center has moved, or our politics have moved to the right sufficiently that Nicholson is now in the center. This used to be but there's a lot of libertarian money involved in this. The Koch brothers, the tech sort of people. I mean, it seems like it's just a rebrand in many respects, broadly speaking. Then we can go through the specifics.
I think that's fair. And some of what Bill Clinton did with reinventing government, is similar to some of what they're saying, and some of what Bill Clinton did actually worked, right? He gave permission for bureaucrats to have more judgment, to overcome some procedures, and under that umbrella, the Veterans Health Administration became the best healthcare in the country. Totally socialized healthcare, by the way. And the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, went from a catastrophic laughingstock to a very effective agency. So there are things you can champion in government agency reform that are worth championing. And Niskanen Center and these other guys, Ezra Klein and the others, they champion some of that stuff, and we give them credit for that. But unfortunately, they also champion in some ideas that I don't think are going to achieve the goals that they themselves set out to achieve. And
I want to get to that part because you do it step by step. But I guess what I'm at is that the idea of we should have we should look at how certain regulations function. And if we see that they're not effective, we should change them. Seems to be just a very reasonable approach to anything, right? Yeah. I mean, we even do that. Everybody does that in their daily life. Right? I'm not getting to work on time. If I take this, the number 2 bus, I should switch to the number 3 bus. But when you start to make it a prescription that is universally applicable, it seems to me then it moves into an ideological project.
Yes. And that's the danger here.
Yeah.
My friend Mike Lofgren said that getting into a bidding war with Republicans over deregulation is kind of like getting into a hot dog eating contest with Joey Chestnut. You're just going to lose.
Right.
And so much of what has gone wrong in this world, in this country, so much of the problem they themselves, the abundance liberals, lay out is the result of previous deregulation, right? So yes, some regulations need to be tweaked, eliminated, reformed, but we've had more deregulation than we've had regulation over the last 40 years, and what's that got us?
Right, but that's and I want to get into the specifics too. What's odd about this to me, just to give people a perspective on it, is that progressive housing reforms already do talk about eliminating certain regulations. And again, we will get into the specifics, but it feels like they're taking the 4th bullet point on what a lot of left-wingers have already discussed and broadening it into making it the emphasis, which is that it should be, it's a libertarian framework. We should be cutting red tape. We should be making things more efficient. Agree. But for a lot of people who are looking at the consolidation of wealth as the biggest problem in this country, that's point E or point F, right, on the bullet points. So I'm, I guess, a bit skeptical about the timing of this, because as we're seeing Bernie Sanders and AOC go across the country and turn out tens of thousands of people with a economically populist agenda that puts workers and wages first and breaking up the oligarchy first, to have this presented as the alternative vision feels quite deliberate to me and not the best thing for our politics in this moment.
Well, it is. I think you've laid out the stakes and the battle quite precisely. On the one hand, you have, Bernie and AOC out talking about the oligarchy and what it's doing to destroy government. And on the other hand, you have people in the Democratic Party, especially the donor class, especially those Democrats who really feel burned by the left. They think Democrats might have won if it hadn't been for the progressives, and the battle lines. And they're glomming on to this to this abundance liberalism thing with equal fervor.
Mm-hmm.
But they're doing it in op-eds and Substacks and in fundraising dinners. It's not a mass thing. Whether it can be, who knows? But
doubtful.
That's kind of where the stakes are right now.
Well, I want to circle back to this because I don't know how broad the public support was for a reconstituting our antitrust regime that we had prior to Ronald Reagan and the Borkian antitrust. But what it was a concerted effort over the course of almost a decade. In fact, a decade, I would say, of this kind of stuff. They didn't have someone who was that big of a champion that had the New York Times, a big piece of a plot of land on the real estate on the New York Times op-ed. But it was this type of thing. So by the time Elizabeth Warren had influence in Biden's office, all of these people came in the form of Lena Khan and Jonathan Cantor and whatnot. And this is how you get agendas into administrations, by starting 4 or 5 years out, because obviously nothing's going to happen for the next 4 years. So let's get to sort of like what I appreciate about your piece is it is completely a nuts and bolts, I don't want to say evisceration, but certainly a weakening of the sort of like factual basis of their arguments. I just have this one sort of like quote from, I'll read that quote from Ezra Klein on his book tour in a minute, but let's get to this. You start and they start with housing. This is where abundance. So walk through their primary sort of like, I guess, focus on housing is in, frankly, like coastal elite areas, I guess, because they say it's the most productive, these areas, right, which is probably true, economically anyways, although I'm not sure that should be the grounds for making sure that people can afford housing.
Project.
But it's where it's also most expensive, so it's harder for people there, supposedly. I mean, I think, those metro areas get bigger and bigger, it seems to me. But what do they get wrong in this? Or what do they propose and what's wrong about it?
So let's start with what they get right. Housing prices are extraordinarily high. Rents are high. We have underproduced housing for the last 10 years. We overproduced housing for the previous 10 years, and we got, a collapse of the global financial system. Now we've underproduced housing, and it's part of what you see as the backlash that strengthened Trump. So they're right about the underproduction of housing. They are right that much of it is driven by local zoning ordinances. And, in particular, zoning ordinances that prescribe only single-family detached homes as opposed to apartments. And they are part of a movement, the YIMBY movement, that is very strong among millennials, people living in these very high rent, high price coastal metro areas. that said, look, I ought to have the right, it's a libertarian idea, I ought to have the right to build anything I want on my piece of property.
Yes, in my backyard.
Yes, in my backyard, exactly. And in theory, right, if you could eliminate all zoning and anybody could build anything anywhere, market theory would say, yes, you would have a whole lot of housing. And, I grew up in suburbs. I live in the suburbs. I know the suburbs pretty well. If somebody wanted to build a 2-flat or a 4-flat in my neighborhood, I'd be fine with that. The problem with Ezra and Ezra Klein, Matt Iglesias, Yoni Applebaum, and Jerusalem Demzis, and some of the other thinkers here, is we've already now tried these reforms for several years in California, in Oregon, in Minneapolis. And the end result is we've gotten a trickle of new houses in the form of sort of apartment buildings and granny flats, not very much. But what we have also gotten is tremendous backlash against the people in these neighborhoods, because 9 out of 10 of them would say, if you built a 4-flat in, next to me, who knows what kind of low-income people are going to come in and where they're going to park their cars, and can the schools handle it, and the traffic. People hate it. People just hate it. So it becomes an enormously difficult project to happen, and the backlash that you're likely to get is just beyond what you can imagine. And so what these guys are doing is provoking senior Democratic elected officials and donors into an agenda that is going to have unbelievable blowback among voters. And what's really tragic is it doesn't need to happen. You don't have to fight that fight.
I just want to be clear. So, we have evidence that their stated goal is unachieved because there are other problems, and we'll talk in a moment about what those problems are. But B, as a political matter, the return on investment is lousy because, there are going to be proposals that any political party pursues where there's going to be blowback. And if it sufficiently provides what it is supposedly going to provide, I think in certain situations, in many, frankly, depending on what the goals are, blowback is fine, because if you give enough people, what they need, those people who are going to be upset because it's somehow sort of like they perceive it as diminishes from them. That's what politics are. That's what it seems to me. It's like the space is not going to grow on trees, and sort of density doesn't grow on trees. They want to sell federal lands to put housing on there. The Trump administration said this. Well, there's a reason why there's no housing. There's a reason why federal government has those lands more often than not. It's because no one else wanted them. And the cost of both to like the individuals living there and to society to sort of make those spaces habitable is incredibly extreme. So
yeah, no, it's not a good idea, but there are good ideas that are adjacent to what these abundance liberals are saying. In fact, some of them have agreed with us for 15 years to do this, and that is, don't lift zoning restrictions on residential neighborhoods. Lift them on commercial property near transit. When cities and suburbs have done that, they've gotten an explosion of what they call walkable communities, apartment buildings, condos, tall buildings where people can find restaurants and grocery stores and hop on a bus or hop on a metro. That really works. If you walk around DC, you see it everywhere. And to give you an example, in Minneapolis, which is a city that kind of epitomizes the great abundance liberal experiment, they eliminated zoning in single-family residential neighborhoods, and they got very, very little in the last few years that they've tried it, new permits for new apartment buildings. but they also lifted the size restrictions from 6 stories to 30 in commercial properties near transit. And they got 20,000 housing units. And that made the rent increases in Minneapolis a fraction of what they have been in the state, and actually lowered the homeless population in Minneapolis, even as it went up in the state as a whole. And, there are other examples of that around the country. So again, abundance liberals aren't against what I just said. It's that they're also for having unnecessary, provocative, and fights that aren't literally going to deliver what they say they're going to deliver.
When characterize this at a 30,000 foot level, because when I hear that the solution is just a blanket get rid of regulations and invite the supply side to come in and make profits off of this. The thing that just rattles around in my head is the way that Barack Obama dealt with the banks in the wake of the financial crisis, right? You have a choice. Very explicit, was outlined, and supposedly, we've talked on this program many, many times. Barney Frank telling the story about Paul, I can't, it's the Paulson. Was it Paulson or? No, it wasn't Geithner. I think it was Paulson. But Obama was, faced with a choice. In fact, Bush was on some level too, I guess, at the end. I can either go to the supply side, which is the banks providing the mortgages, and bail them out and hope they do the right thing. Or I can take the hope out of the equation and just bail out the homeowners. They already have an obligation to pay the money to the banks. So if I give the money to the homeowners, I know where that money is going to go. It's going to go to the banks because the pipes are already there. But if I give the money to the banks, I'm just hoping that I've guessed their incentive structure right. And it sounds like, at least in terms of like the housing, they're just hoping that they understand that the incentive structure, and it's clear they don't. I'm not saying I do, but we can determine, it seems to me that we as a government, regulation, non-regulation, in many respects is always the same thing. It's a government action. You deregulate or regulate. It's just a question of, are you doing it in a way where you have less guesswork as to what's going to happen?
Yeah. And another way of looking at it is, who writes the rules? The abundance liberals are angry at local governments for writing rules that have excluded people from their suburbs, from their cities, from their neighborhoods, through this strict zoning. And I understand there are whole wings of libraries full of books about how bad exclusionary zoning is, racist, classist. It's terrible. But we've been doing it for 100 years, right? It's not a new problem. And so you can go to war with local governments, which more or less reflect the voters who live there, and side with, the state government or the mayor or the federal government and say, we're going to come in and we're going to take away your regulatory power and we're going to impose our regulatory power. Either way, it's regulation. And I can make a moral argument either way. I can make a practical argument either way, but somebody's got to write the rules. So to your point, there are smart rules and dumb rules. There are rules that are written with democratic input and rules that are written by private entities, right? Some work out, some don't. There's not an ideological thing here, but it's deeply practical. It
seems to me, and let's move on to, let's say, infrastructure. But the thing is, and I will admit that I have yet to get very far in the abundance books whatsoever. For the most part, I've been reading reviews. But there is, even in, like, as you tell this story of like there is one consistent sort of like player in this that doesn't seem to ever get sort of like pinpointed. I mean, it does in your critique on some level in terms of we're talking about monopolies and we're talking about corporate power. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, to the extent that there's any distortion in the regulatory frameworks of localities or states or in any other place, to the extent there's any, what they would call distortion or short-sightedness insofar as it's not supporting a broader population, it's because of concentration of wealth. It's because of money. Always.
Yeah. Look, one of the reasons housing is unaffordable in, say, San Francisco or New York is that so many people with so much money have bid up the prices to the point where nobody else can afford it, right? This is an inequality argument, right? You could get rid of the zoning tomorrow and you have that problem. And here's the thing, Sam and Emma, if somehow we take this problem on and we eliminate, we try to go after local single-family zoning, do you think the wealthy neighborhoods are going to let apartments in? Right? No. You think they're not going to use their money and their lawyers to keep that out? Where are the apartment buildings going to go? They're going to go to middle-class neighborhoods. They're going to go to lower middle-class neighborhoods. Those are the people that don't have the lawyers to keep them out. Those are the people who don't control their local officials the way the wealthy do. So what the abundance liberals kind of agree with you. They say, yes, this is rich progressives who are hypocrites who say they care about the poor, but then won't let housing be built in their neighborhoods. Well, sure, but
I would argue it's rich people broadly. It's rich people broadly. Some of the progressives may be hypocrites, but it's rich people broadly that are not doing that.
Conservatives with big fancy McMansions don't want, apartment buildings in their neighborhood as much or more than progressives, in big McMansions.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.